Okay, good afternoon. I'm actually going to get this started right on time so that we can have plenty of time for questions for this session. So if you are here to learn more about digital ID and the eKYC process and how biometrics can play a role in this, you're in the right afternoon breakout session. My name is Kelly Hattel, and I'm a Senior Financial Sector Specialist here at ADB, and I focus primarily on financial inclusion in Southeast Asia. And I'm particularly honored and privileged to be moderating this panel because one of the activities that I'm currently engaged in is working with other parts of ADB to help it to work with the Philippine government in the rollout and implementation of the Philippines national ID. So it's a very exciting time for us, and I am honored we have such an experienced and an experienced panel today, based on their own experience and then the companies that they're working with now. And so what I will do is I will introduce the speakers, and then we'll have a discussion, and of course we want to leave time for the questions that, if everyone has the app, then we'll take your questions. So what we want to look at is answering some key questions. You know, who owns a person's identity? When you talk about national identification, it's an individual's identity. And then there's an issue of security, how security is the biometric information authentication, and how is this used in the critical piece of know your customer. And from a financial inclusion perspective, this is fundamental. And how do you? One of the key issues that we were talking about earlier is how do you do this with systems that are in the process of being rolled out, and you have limited connectivity, online, offline authentication, how does this happen? And then there's the whole legal framework of how you handle the data, who owns the data, the person, the business, the government entity, and of course, so these identity systems have to be robust, and they have to be technically sound and sustainable. So what we want to understand today is the role of biometrics and identity, the different aspects of biometrics. We're going to hear some examples of what's happening in the field for governments, but also for businesses, for financial institutions. And then we will talk about some of the key challenges that these different companies are facing in the markets that they're currently working in, or new markets that they're looking to go in. And just to bring it, to a specific example that many of us are first of all aware of, India's Aadhaar, that it's a unique 12-digit identification system. It's the world's largest biometric identification system. And I just checked on their website to see what the latest numbers are, and it's 1.246 billion numbers have been generated, 90% of the population, 34 billion authentications, and 7 billion eKYC transactions. So I think if India has been able to make this kind of progress, one of the largest countries in the world, I think this is it certainly has been informative for other countries following suit. But particularly because I work on financial inclusion, in 2019, 80% of the population had a bank account, and that was up from 40% in 2011. So again, we look at countries like India as an example of what is possible. And particularly if you look at women's account ownership, it increased by 30% from 2011 to 2017, and the poorest households by 40%. So those are two also very important observations. And now with mobile penetration expected to be 90% by 2020, the use cases and the benefits there's many. But we also know in terms of data protection and identity and how that information is used and stored, and what you have control over as an individual. There's been a number of cases, and so what we'd like to do is learn more about some of these issues from our panelists. So today we We are very fortunate to have, I'll start with Ms. Alexandra Lynn Hollenby. She's Senior Vice President of Payment and Financial Services and Risk at Gojek, which is based in Indonesia. And I think it's interesting, it started out as a ride-sharing service and now has more than 20 services. And the motto is speed, innovation, and social impact. So I think those are interesting descriptions of the business. Then we have Mr. Daiichi Iwata, who's director of NEC Corporation, based in Japan, and NEC obviously works in a number of different areas, but has been working in digital identification for quite some time, as well as biometric authentication. So we look forward to hearing his experiences. He's also worked in India, and so that will be useful. And then we have Ms. Binru Tan. She's Chief Executive Officer of One Connect Financial Technology, which is a subsidiary of Ping An. And so One Connect Financial provides solutions around digital banking, insurance, investment solutions, SAS cloud platform, and provides services for businesses and financial institutions. And then we have Mr. Bob Reed, who's Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Everest. And we'll have to have him explain more what this platform provides. But it's a decentralized platform, and it offers a scalable payment solution. He works with governments and also with the users of the services. So I'm going to shift to sitting down. So I have a few questions that we've discussed ahead of time. Is this on? There we go. And I'm going to speak with each panelist, but I would invite all the others to share their experience where it's relevant. So I think to sort of set the stage, first we want to look at, I'll start with you, Bob. What's the landscape for digital identification globally? In terms of countries that have a national digital identification system, and particularly ones that's linked to biometric data.
For those of you who don't know Everest, we built a platform that has biometric digital identity with KYC, a wallet or an account in the cloud, a ledger, and e-money. And so what that looks like is a decentralized Aadhaar plus India stack, or think about Facebook's Libra, but we didn't mess it up. Okay? I say that affectionately, like they're gonna fix it, it'll be okay. And I have friends on the team. So with that platform, the way we see the landscape going globally is systems are evolving, I would say, beyond foundational identity. That is, as I put it, everyone has a national ID now, your normal wallet, you go like, okay, is that biometrically tagged? And what we're seeing is systems are going beyond that to go into, okay, what about my bank identity? What about my insurance identity? What about all of the different services I want to do? And you have to have what we call graduated or selective sharing abilities in an identity system to actually bring any value to an economy or to the user. So I always like doing this. Like, look at digital identity, and I go, like, this card is now digital and on my phone or something. But then you've got to do your bank and your credit card and your insurance and your everything else and your money and your receipts. And so what we're seeing is people are now building systems to digitize the whole thing, right? And if you don't do that, then you're really just stuck in, I would call, operating system layer, right? So Aadhaar by itself, mildly interesting. India stack and everything else it enables about the bank accounts and the transactions and everything else, that's where it starts getting interesting. The metaphor I always give is somebody handed you, Microsoft Windows. Like, that's digital identity. No one really cares. Users don't get anything out of an operating system. You give Microsoft Office, Now they have something to do. They can do insurance, they can do transactions, they can actually start doing things. So we're seeing the global landscape, sort of, I would say, take the next evolution to start getting into services around biometric identity. One thing that's actually worthy of note, and I'll be brief on it, is we're seeing biometrics is utterly critical. So we come from the blockchain world, just to let you know, a bunch with Ethereum. Biometrics seem to be the only way to determine you're human and you're unique. No deacon. Right? So there's a lot of talk about identity out there, like, let me do a verifiable claim this way or that way. Biometrics are utterly critical, especially as we get into emerging markets. You have to be able to dedupe a couple of billion people. So roundabout, that answers your sense of what we're seeing in the landscape.
Okay, thank you. In terms of, if we go to biometric, Daichi, can you kind of walk us through what exactly is biometric information and what's the, how do you go through collecting that information, and what are a few of the challenges in doing so? And Ping An, please, or I'm sorry, please chime in with the issue.
Yes, again, I'm Daichi from NEC. NEC is basically IT company in Japan, but we have the best facial recognition technologies and providing this fingerprint and facial recognition technologies globally, especially for like the public sectors. And I have been involved in this, ADHA project, especially to make that useful, to make the banking access possible in rural areas. That's the project I did. So when you use the biometrics, let's look at what the India did. There was a couple of things they are using biometrics. One is, again, providing the uniqueness. That's how they started. That's why they started a unique identity authority of India. When you look at FATF, their recommendation is a risk-based approach for the KYC. But even for the low transactions of money, if the ID is theft, ID is duplicated, you have to be clear that the more higher level of assurance, meaning the more cost on authentication and identifications. So uniqueness is very critical in doing the safer transactions. So that's what they did in India. So when you enroll for ADHA for the first time, the biometrics will check already registered 1.2 billion databases and searches if there is any duplication or not. And if that person is already registered, no ID can be issued. So that's how the biometrics is used. So it's not really one-to-one matching, but it's searching 1.2 billion databases. So giving uniqueness is one role. Second one is, again, authentication. Authentication is basically the claim who you claim to be you are. So it has to come with trusted data to be able to proper KYC for AML and CFT requirement, but authentication can be, if it's linked to unique ID, can claim that you are the unique person holding that data or holding that, if I'm Daichi, I'm working in NEC, I'm not doing the wrong thing, I'm not criminal, that's something you will be able to provide. So when you look at this kind of biometrics, you have to be aware if you're using for authentication or just giving uniqueness or verification. So that's, I think, the starting point when you start talking about the use of biometrics.
Thank you. Binru, can you talk about some of the challenges that you've found?
Yeah, if I may, Ping An is a financial institution in China, and One Connect is the fintech subsidiary of the Ping An Group. We service financial institutions. That's how KYC then comes into picture, because a lot of banks are taking the lead in creating KYC for remote account opening. Most of our customers are in Thailand to begin with, because the Thailand Central Bank has recently approved secondary account to be opened via mobile phones. We've been in and out of sandboxes everywhere in Southeast Asia, and also talking to a lot of central banks with regards to the difficulty challenges of the sandboxes. The necessity of it, definitely, but you will find that the KYC challenges, number one, is the lack of definition, standard definition for KYC, simply because everybody had different IDs. I'm implementing the third bank now in Thailand, and the actual KYC is different, because one bank will choose a driving license and a passport, another bank will choose a different ID, right? Because they're different IDs, right? Some banks want 2 IDs, some banks are okay with 1 ID. And I think in Philippines, I'm told there are 17 IDs, so you'll be. Definitely. So I think it's a necessary evil, because if you don't have it, you high chance can't do any financial inclusion. But there's a lot to be done to make it more standardized. Probably a lot more to discuss with regards to the security, risk and governance of it. For One Connect, because we service what the banks need today, what the banks need tomorrow, KYC is just one portion. We do a lot of virtual banking stack as well for the banks that's trying to evolve to transform to be a digital bank. So KYC is just one component of the virtual bank.
Okay, thank you. Alex, could you talk about, one of the questions that I'm interested in understanding more, and I think it's relevant, is, what is the role that government plays and also private sector plays in creating this digital ecosystem, digital identity ecosystem, of which, of course, the authentication, the eKYC all plays a role within. But it's interesting, and also where you have, uneven developments in parts of the ecosystem. How do you create a dynamic, very cutting edge company like Gojek in this environment?
Yes, so thanks a lot. And I was thinking, why did I get this question? And is it because our CEO just became a government minister? We have been working very closely with the government to try to address some of these issues. I think the first issue is what is each organization, private sector, public sector, trying to get out of this? The private sector, or at least Gojek, wants an easy, secure, safe, and scalable solution. We don't want people to have to go through the KYC process multiple times. What does the government want? The government wants people to have access to these systems, but also for them to be safe and secure. So our interests in a lot of ways are aligned, but how we get there is a little bit different. So when you go to the government, they, first of all, are some sections of the government are not monolith. One section of the government is looking at fraud risk. Another section of the government is looking at AML risk. Gojek, GoFin, and GoPay are actually regulated by 2 different regulators within Indonesia with different standards of KYC that we then have to go and unify somehow as one process. And that's one process just to maintain our licensing. And then there's another process that actually meets our business needs to remain secure. So we are looking at ways to identify the device as well as ways to identify the individual. The way to identify the individual is normally through government ID and also through biometrics. But there's also lots of authentication methods through the actual mobile device itself, all of the tokenization and things that we're using as well. So when we approach government, a lot of times, first of all, we just ask them to talk to each other because we have to go from regulator to regulator to help them understand the customer experience. And then also describe how it is that we're actually using the IDs that they have. How we're using SIM, how we're trying to match SIM is the driver's license in Indonesia, how we're using SIM, how we're using a KTP, and how we're trying to dedupe or match them together is actually not the easiest thing that's ever happened. So I think the way that government and private sector works together is they sometimes feel at odds, but they very much are not. I think we all have the same goal. We just have to make sure that government understands how we're using technology, and technology understands that government's trying to do the right thing, but they might not be doing it in the way that we think about it.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have anything else to add to that response? You can.
So I have the benefit of the ex-president of Estonia built a digital nation on board, and so I've gotten some words of wisdom on, and having worked with the Indonesian government and in depth. What we've found across the planet now is you usually need political will to do it. You need somebody above all the ministries to actually, if not, you'll have the Ministry of Health competing with the Ministry of Finance. And then ultimately, in Estonia, nobody really knows this, it was the KYC, it was the banks that came together with the government and said, please give us one central thing that makes our costs go down and everything else easy for you. And so if you don't have that type of political will and that type of partnership starting out, you will end up like Indonesia. Right? We're having the experience now working with Australia and building the Central Bank of Samoa's platform. And that is, if you're at that level, you can get agreement quickly on what the policy should be.
Thank you. I'd like to shift to, we touched on it, but I'd like to speak to it in more depth about an individual's right to privacy and data protection. So who owns the data? Annie?
So I'll use Singapore as an example. In Singapore, the government has a central database of all IDs called SingPass. And SingPass has been there for maybe about 6-7 years now. Today, if I were to purchase the insurance, I don't have to provide my tax information to the insurance agent. All I have to do is to give him an approved access, grant him the access to certain data in my tax profile through SingPass. So he has to send me a link. I have to authorize him to get access to this information, and he gets it once off, enough for him to process my insurance policy. So we had that database already for about 6-7 years. Today, Singapore is trying to upgrade it to biometrics simply because everybody uses passwords for SingPass. And when you use passwords, you use your birthday, your mother's maiden name, your whatever, it's a standard. So by just brutally hacking all kinds of combinations, you can actually get in. So as the effort to gather that database and the convenience it's given to Singapore citizens is immense, but the security needs to be constantly enhanced because the hackers are always improving, so you need to constantly improve. So we're changing it to a biometrics database. And then One Connect is also doing the EID, improved version for Hong Kong. As you know, Singapore and Hong Kong are always competing and learning from each other. Right? So Hong Kong is also implementing a biometrics database that we are supporting Hong Kong in implementation. So with regards to who owns the data, definitely the individual. As a Singaporean, I own and authorize the data. But you have to then, because most Singaporeans, all Singaporeans in fact, were trained to trust the government. So I think for this to be successful, the citizens have to trust the government to own that database for you, whereby you own the authorization of sharing the data when you want to use it.
And how do you build trust in places where maybe there has been limited trust, or there's been breaches of the trust in the past, or looking at other examples? For example, in India, I mean, my understanding was that it wasn't actually the central database that was breached, it was the external users that were storing data that was breached. But the way that it was presented to the public was it was a central database. So there was a crisis in terms of confidence and trust in the system. And so how do you generate that, especially in a country, say like the Philippines, where they're just embarking on this long road to developing an entire digital ecosystem?
So I have two things. One is about building trust. I think it comes down to willingness to explain from the provider side. So we did NEC did one with a pilot project with the city in Tokyo, and we used the facial recognition on the street to see where the tourist is doing the shopping and so on. So we posted the two different sets of posters which one get more like social acceptance by citizens. And the one got more acceptance is the one that had the phone number to call in if you want to have the what we're doing. That's simple explanation, but whatever you want to know, we'll explain. That willingness, I think, is the basic thing that you want to build the trust. AI is complex, blockchain is complex. Nobody can understand. And that's willingness to explain the one thing. And the second thing about privacy that I've been talking a lot, and that's kind of passionate about finding solutions, is it comes down to basic human rights when the age of AI. So when you talk about human rights, important thing is fairness to access to the market and the freedom for the physical and mental, because digital identity will become the history of your data, and AI can use it to manipulate you, because AI can have an imperfection and people can have manipulation.